Welcome everybody to this Montana Innovation Partnership SBIR Discovery Workshop on identifying SBIR and STTR topics. Our guest today is Ed Kase. He's been a consultant with the Montana Innovation Partnership since 2018, since I really took over this role as program director. Ed, the next slide real quick.
Sure.
Thank you. I want to give you a little bit of a heads up, folks. For those of you joining us from Montana, welcome. I am your point of contact for anything SBIR in the state, but we work with a broad range of partners throughout the state to help really support small businesses here. Welcome to all of you who are outside of Montana. I am one of a number of members of the FAST network, that is Federal and State Technology Partnership programs throughout the United States, who are dedicated to helping small businesses learn about and compete effectively for small business innovation research and small business technology transfer research funding. That is our primary goal and my focus. I would be remiss to not identify our other supporting partners. That is the Small Business Administration through that FAST cooperative agreement, Montana State University, and the Montana Department of Commerce. And I am actually based at MSU's TechLink Center. TechLink is the primary partnership intermediary for Department of Defense and Veterans Administration technology transfer as well. You can find out more about the Montana Innovation Partnership and the resources that we have available for you at our website, or email me at techlinksbir@montana.edu or ann.peterson@montana.edu. But today, next slide, I wanted to again make sure that we introduce you to Ed Kase. Ed Kase and I will be talking to you today about how do you identify, learn about the agencies that may be the best fit for your technology, and then where do you find what types of things they will fund? How do you find those opportunities and the specific topics that are relevant to your technology? So Ed, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass the rest of this over to you. Thank you so much. And I do, before we go, make sure that the chat is open, guys. You can make sure that you post questions there, and I'll relay those as they come along, or I may ask you to go ahead and unmute and ask your question directly. This is an interactive session, but we'll try to make sure that we get through at least these great salient examples that Ed has prepared in the next hour or so.
Thanks, Ann. So as Ann said, I've been working with MTIP for a number of years, and I've been involved with the SBIR program since about 2005. So by education, my bachelor's degree is in engineering, but I've been doing more business development and marketing activities. So focus a lot on technology commercialization, which is a logical outcome from the SBIR program. We're going to give you a little background on the SBIR program, but that isn't the main thrust of this. So the SBIR program has actually been around since 1982. It's a program that is designed to involve small business in the external research and development done by a number of government agencies. So as I said, it's been around, and it's gone through various tweaks in its reauthorizations, but it's largely the program as envisioned 40 years ago. Doesn't seem possible, but so who participates? What are the agencies that work within the SBIR program? So there's a number of them broken out on this slide, and realize that the participation of each agency is based on a percentage. It's 3.2% of their external R&D budget. So that means that the bigger your budget, the bigger your SBIR program. So no surprise that the DoD accounts for roughly 50% of all the SBIR funds that are available. And there are some other sizable participations by different agencies, but you can also see that some agencies, because they have a lesser amount of money, are probably going to make fewer awards. So sometimes that factors into your decisions of which agency should I look at. So, some of the best practices. So really this is meant for you to deliver innovative new technology to whoever your customer is, whichever agency. And part of best practices is to make sure you've talked to your customer, that you understand what it is that they want. Full disclosure, I am also a reviewer for the Department of Energy SBIR program. I review phase 2 commercialization plans. I give high marks if people have actually talked to their customers, gathered requirements from their customers, understand what their minimum viable product might be to meet the needs of those customers. So best practices, this advice has come from a number of winners within the state of Montana that say, you gotta talk to your customers, you gotta have the big picture in mind. So I'm just gonna pass those pearls of wisdom along. So relative to the SBIR program, so in most cases, I'm going to say SBIR, pretty much everything applies to SBIR and STTR. There are some subtle differences, and I will mention those at different points. The big thing is with STTR is usually, in addition to the small business concern executing the research, you have a nonprofit research partner. That could be a university, could be a government lab, could be a similar type of entity, but and that may entail some type of technology transfer, technology licensing. So other than that, the programs run, at least for the purposes of this discussion, run pretty much the same. So when I say SBIR, think of it as being inclusive of both programs. So who's eligible is actually defined by the Small Business Administration. You have to be a US company, you have to be majority US owned, you have to be a for-profit, but that does include some of the public benefit companies. You just can't be a nonprofit. Small is considered under 500 employees. And for someone like me who's worked the small business side most of my career, 500 employees doesn't seem very small, but that's the definition. And again, the focus is on R&D. They don't want to buy something you've already built. And they don't want something that is ready-made in most cases. What they want you to do is either come up with a new technology or take an existing technology and adapt it to a new purpose. The DoD is big on that. They call it dual use. So, so you may see that term as you're looking through the numerous SBIR websites. There actually is a definition of what innovation is. So we just kind of touched on this. They want it to be new or improved. There's got to be some market potential. There has to be some new development. There has to be an unknown or a risk that you're retiring by doing this research. And that's all I'm going to say there. And then the way things are graded is pretty consistent. So the evaluation criteria, they do look for intellectual merit. So that's how researchy or how innovative is it. Impact to your agency customer, whether that's NASA or the Army or the EPA, and also to potential commercial customers. And the reason is, like when the DoD funds stuff, the DoD could be your customer. If you're being funded by someone like the EPA or the Department of Education, they're probably not your customer. Your customer's probably, for the Department of Education, it could be a school system. So think about your impact both to the agency and to whoever your end customer is going to be. And they do look at the expertise of your team. That's one of the things you're going to get rated on. So just understand those things. And that's an instance where sometimes partnering with, say, a university may strengthen your team. So that can be a reason to look at the university route. It is a 3-phase program. So phase 1 is feasibility or proof of concept. It's typically of your big idea. What are the elements that have the highest technical risk, and how can you do some experimentation in phase 1 to reduce or retire that risk? They're typically 3 to 12 months worth of effort that they're looking at. And there's a broad range based on what the agency's budget. So it could be a $50,000 project, or it could be, you know, a $250,000 project. Depends on the agency. That's all spelled out very clearly in the solicitations as to what the dollar limits are. I'll tell you right now that the kind of the average across all agencies proposal to phase one is about 17%, 15 to 20%. So, so it is a competitive process. Phase two is where now you've moved on from that proof of concept and you're going to build a prototype. So it doesn't have to work in an operational environment, but it has to work in a representative environment. You're going to develop something that, you know, maybe isn't ready for mass production, but something that can be used to demonstrate that you've met the criteria of the topic that's been addressed. And we'll talk about topics in a few minutes. Those tend to be about 2 years worth of funding, and they can be anywhere from 600,000 to about 1.5 million. I think NIH may even be higher than that now. I haven't. And then phase three is kind of the biggest misnomer, because phase three is anything that's not SBIR money. So it could be you sell to a customer like Tesla. It could be you sell to the US Army, but you're just not using SBIR funds. Or it could be that you've licensed the technology, you've developed it, but you're going to license it to someone who can manufacture it at scale. There are a couple questions I see in the chat, so I'm going to take a quick look at what's in there. What if the product is aimed at a specific population rather than, say, a government agency? That's actually pretty common. You know, for like the USDA, you might be developing something that is a water savings device that's going to go into an irrigation system. So in that case, it's not aimed at the USDA, it's aimed at farmers. See, or designed, see, what if that is one is historically underserved or marginalized? That does weigh into it, and certain agencies like the USDA does look at specifically at rural community development, and they also look at small and mid-sized farms.
Well, this is a great time also. Please, everybody post your questions at chat. We'll kind of address them as well. Some of these we can go deeper dive. So definitely we can connect afterwards to have the conversation, and I can make sure that we talk. Certainly feel free, even if you're in a different state, feel free to reach out directly to me. We can answer some questions, but then I can also make sure that I give you a warm introduction to anybody in your state that could continue on counseling and coaching you. But those are great questions, Jeannie. But yeah, this is really looking at your customer base, your market, and then we're going to talk a little bit later about mapping kind of your idea to which agencies may be a good fit as well.
Okay, so another question popped in, and I'm going to get to that one
Sure.
in the presentation. So, so Alex, hang on, and we'll get to you.
Great question.
So most agencies post solicitations, and in general, the solicitations have technical areas of interest. Most agencies do what I would consider applied research. So NASA wants an infrared camera for a Mars rover. It's pretty specific. The exception to that, the main exception to that is NSF. NSF funds things that are closer to pure research, and they have, as we'll talk about in more detail, a portfolio of things they like to see. I will let you know that each agency does its own thing. So don't assume that because, hey, I've done this with NASA, so I can go in and crank out an Army one. It's really, I want to say it's 10 separate programs masquerading under the same acronym, but it's worse than that because within DoD, everybody's a little different. So it's about 20 different set of rules depending on how many of these you want to actually address. Most agencies have their own schedule, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more. And agencies post things on their sites, so it's a good idea to pay attention to their sites. But SBIR.gov is kind of a catch-all. So you should be seeing a browser window, and this is everything that's open right now. And you can see there's a bunch of health and human services. You know, the USDA one just opened recently. Here's NSF, which is open right now. There's some DoD topics that are open right now. Not listed here. The Department of Energy has published topics, but they haven't opened the solicitation. So that means you can see what it is you're going to have to prepare, and you can start to prepare, but they won't start accepting applications till the solicitation's actually open.
Yeah. And we'll talk to guys, as Ed's showing us, this is a great way, kind of just in general, to take a look at everything. We'll advise you when we're coaching you and with other partners who are coaching you. Very likely, let's try to identify agencies that are a good fit, and the best resource for what an agency has open under their SBIR programs will be their specific SBIR site. So again, that information we're going to be sharing with you as well.
Yep.
This is kind of a good quick look at some of the things that are open.
Okay. So this is what the solicitation schedule.
Could I go back? I'm sorry, Ed. I'm interjecting a little bit. But another point on this, agencies have their sites, SBIR.gov, as Ed showed, grants.gov, as Ed described, and SAM.gov. I'm going to tell you, as I just said, we want to channel you more to the agency site because that is the most accurate, up-to-date information. Grants.gov is a great place to look. SAM.gov too. And I have a number of my partners from the Apex accelerators who are the gurus about SAM.gov. They are my cohort, my partners when I have clients to navigate SAM.gov for the registrations that are required for any award that you may receive from the federal government. That SAM is System for Award Management. And it is a beast. I don't think that any of the Apex Accelerator people will counteract me or counter that call, that claim by me. SAM.gov is a beast, but that is one resource as well. It's just not the one that I recommend. It is the hardest one to use for actually finding these topics. But we do have experts about that. If you have, if government contracting is part of your commercial strategy. Thanks.
Yeah, I would say if you're gonna focus on SAM.gov, pour yourself a fresh cup of coffee before you start.
Or something harder. That's my recommendation. All right. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for letting me go back and just talk about that a little bit.
So on the SBIR website, they have, so the last time this was updated was roughly 8 months ago, 7 months ago. So this is kind of how the cadence of when things get released occurs. Everybody does things a little differently. And so you can realize that most people do a solicitation once per year. Department of Defense does it 3 times per year, plus they have what I call out of cycle topics. So for the current fiscal year, the SBIR is 23.1, 23.2, 23.3. Out of cycle stuff that comes and goes is in this catch-all called 23.4. And if you're keeping score for the STTRs, it's 23.A, 23.B, 23.C, 23.D. NIH or Health and Human Services does things a little differently. They put out a solicitation where the topics stand for the entire year, but they have 3 different submission deadlines. Same with NSF, they have 3 different windows when you can submit. Department of Energy has 2 releases per year, but they're entirely separate topics. So there's a lot of different organizations within DOE, and they kind of split across the 2 releases. So if something's not in release 1, it might be in release 2 because the organization that best matches what technology you develop might not be in that first release. And as I said, topics for release 1 for fiscal 24 were just published earlier this month.
Earlier in July. Yep.
So SBIR.gov is a great resource. You can find things like what have they funded in the past? So this is actually a screen capture of everything that's ever been funded. So you can see there's close to 200,000 SBIRs that have been awarded since 1982. The navigation on the left-hand side lets you subset that so you don't have to chunk it all at once. And you can download stuff into an Excel file to look at as well. There's also a lot of tutorials on the SBIR.gov site. So if you're looking for how to do stuff, that's a great resource. You have to do your registrations. You have to have a tax ID. You have to be in SAM.gov. If you're not in the acquisition system, they don't know how to pay you. You have to be registered with the SBA. Some agencies have their own sites you have to be registered on. If any of this is unclear, each state has, I know they've changed their names, but they used to be PTACs, Procurement Technical Assistance Centers. The PTAC people can help you at no cost to you. So there's a lot of people that want to charge you to help you. Start with your PTAC because they'll get you what you need. So
those are now called the Apex accelerators, folks. Yeah. So the Montana PTAC, for those of you in Montana or other states, you have every state has a Procurement Technical Assistance Center consortium or group of people in different regions within each state. And Montana PTACs, Apex accelerators as well. Those, they can definitely help you with anything government contracting, system for award management. And then we can make sure for agency specific with the SBIR programs, it's usually their submission portals that require the registrations. And again, for SBIR, the registration is at SBIR.gov. That's the SBC control ID that they're talking about, that registration. So, yep.
thanks, Dan.
For our Apex partners.
And the other thing, cautionary tale of registrations, it can take a couple weeks to get through all of these. Do not leave them to the end. I have seen people have their entire proposal written and they can't submit because they're not in one of the databases, right? So that's one, start the process. I say at least 6 weeks, because if you make a mistake and there's like a mismatch between two of the databases, the PTAC can help you fix it, but it takes time. So give yourself at least 6 weeks before a deadline is kind of my rule of thumb. So how do you start? So the first thing is, the way I like to see companies use SBIR is something's already in your product roadmap. It's already in your vision. And you're thinking, how do I get the resources to actually make this happen? So think about what your focus is, what's your core competency? Why did you found your company? Now try to figure out who's interested in those things. Look at previous solicitations, so all the websites, and there's a appendix at the end of this that has links to the different agency sites. You can go look at old solicitations and say, has anybody ever looked at this before? You're going to get a copy of these slides, so all these links that are live will be live for you. But here we've gone back to that SBIR main website, and if you say, I do X-band radar.
For Alex, we could put quantum in there to your question as well.
Yeah, whatever your core competency is, and you can see that there's been 150 projects funded. You can go in and look at the details. There's an abstract of what was submitted. You can find out who the company is. You can find out who the funding agency, in this case, Missile Defense Agency. Fairly recent, it was from a 2021 solicitation. So all this information is available to you.
This is great for some of your market research guys for a second, just to see what agencies may have funded something similar. Doesn't mean that they're going to fund that in the future, but gives you that idea which agencies are interested in this type of product development, this technology development. And obviously MDA, if you were doing X-band radar. So
this is how you kind of figure out what agencies might be interested. And sometimes it's not as simple as you think. It's like, why do satellite technology? So I'm a NASA person. It's like, well, Space Force is part of Air Force. NOAA has weather satellites. Do you fit across one of those? It's like, I've got a medical technology. I should be looking at NIH. Well, within the Department of Defense, there's a Defense Health Agency. And there's also medical technologies for NSF in their portfolio. So you have to think broadly enough that, who might need it. Battery technology, you can go to almost any agency within reason. You know, NASA looks at batteries, DoD looks at batteries, Department of Energy, NSF. So you could have multiple options. And the one cautionary tale, I've seen people, it's like, if it's not in your roadmap, but you look at it's like, we could do that. That could be true, but there's an opportunity cost to chasing something that isn't in your roadmap. So I always discourage people, unless you come up with a good reason why that's the thing to do. I tell people don't chase fringe topics. If it's not in your roadmap, let it pass.
And that's one of the things that we coach you with, guys, is really kind of having a really clear statement and focus on the vision, what you want to do for your product, but also then helping you map with the agencies. So we want to help you do DIY as much as you possibly can, but make sure, feel free to reach out to us to kind of help refine what you're looking for. Because again, as Ed mentioned, you should be looking probably at more than one agency to consider possible funding for your technologies, because more than one typically will be interested in development in that area.
Okay. So this is the last introductory thing, which is sign up on the different websites for email alerts. They'll tell you when solicitations are open. They'll tell you if there's been a revision to a solicitation. They'll give you other information like that. So, so always look at SBIR.gov. Always be on the agency's website, because that tends to be where the most current information and most current emails come from.
And you'll find the serve that Ed talked about, sign up for their email addresses, NASA, NIH, SEED, whatever. Make sure you're receiving those emails so you're notified right away when opportunities are open.
And the other thing is, when you go to write your proposal, know what the agency's strategic objectives are, because those are the things you're going to want to stress in your proposals. I know it's a little off the topic of finding topics, but understand what's driving the agency to publish the particular topics that they are publishing.
Yeah. And Alex, I'm gonna go back to a little bit to Alex's question, Ed, too. This is actually Alex, that's going to be one, and you and I can talk more too. That's a great way to find what is that agency interested in funding from a research and development standpoint. Their strategic plans, NASA, for example, has a taxonomy of, their forward-looking technology needs. A lot of these, USDA, et cetera, you're gonna learn a lot about what an agency may be willing to fund by making sure that you're mapping what you're trying to do with what they're trying to do for their strategic R&D efforts. So we can talk more about that. We're giving you a lot of formulas, folks, in terms of how to set yourself up for success with SBIR and finding these topics. It's work, and we can't replace any of your own. Make sure you're getting to know the agency as thoroughly as you possibly can. Then you're going to be able to tell your story. You're going to be able to prepare your pitch, your proposal to them much more effectively if you're talking their language and letting them know why it's important, that how your technology development aligns with what they're trying to achieve as well.
Okay, so we're halfway through our hour, and we're going to go through 4 examples. So this is going to be kind of a whirlwind tour. The links are all live, and there's going to be a recording of this, so you should be able to go back and replay things. We're going to start with NSF. NSF, again, less applied research, more basic research. They do publish a solicitation, and it contains a lot of information, including, who points of contact might be that you can discuss things with, what areas they're looking at, and also what goes into the proposal.
I'm going to add, not to challenge, just a quick clarification too, because I actually just had a pitch to the basic research. We want to clarify basic research and applied research. Everything in SBIR should be applied research. You're getting to the point where foundational research has been established to support your technology development, but what your project will be is proof of concept, and then further product development. So it's always a little bit of semantics. Basic research may talk about foundational or academic research. This should be at the point where it's applied, where you still need some R&D to prove out the concept, and then go on to further product development. NSF likes, instead of basic, I would say early stage. They love that early stage, but they still want to see foundational research already been done.
So as you can see from this timeline, the step 2 is kind of unique to NSF, where you have to do a project pitch. And so the way you approach things is the first thing you do is you look at their portfolio. So when you look at NSF's portfolio, you can, as you kind of bounce over things, it tells you not just what the high level topic is, what some of the subtopics is. So if you were doing, if I was, again, a battery person, I might go into energy technologies. And I can see that, you know, there's a lot of stuff with energy storage, happens to fall here. Renewables, if you're doing stuff where it's a combination of solar and some type of storage. So lots of different things show up in the portfolio. So when they say a pitch, it's not a pitch like an investor pitch. It's, let me get this out of the way. So the pitch, I consider it more like a short white paper. So they want 500 words. What's your technology innovation? 500 words. What are your objectives and what are the challenges? So this is kind of where your innovation comes in. Market opportunity, which is only 250 words. Do you know who your customer is? Do you know what problem you're solving for your customer? And then company and team, kind of the why you and not someone else. And when you write these, then you submit them through a portal. The portfolio manager for that area reviews it and gives you feedback. Either you've been invited to submit a proposal, we need clarification before we can invite you to submit a proposal, you're not invited, but these are the things we'd like you to work on if you want to resubmit this. So that's the typical feedback that you get.
And again, NSF is an example of a granting agency. We really didn't talk about that. Grants and contracting agencies are slightly different. But so topics are usually areas of interest for granting agencies. They're not as specific because they accept investigator-initiated proposals, but it does still have to align with that agency's objectives, right? So when you're looking at those portfolios for NSF, that really is essentially their topics, their list of topics that they're open to receiving applications for.
And then when you actually go to write your proposal, as I said, they give you the instructions. So here's all the required elements. It's everything down to how wide your margins are and how big your font is, and is it double spaced or single spaced or 1.5 space, and they're all different. So again, don't assume that because I did this for the Navy, I can do the same thing for Department of Energy. And here's where we actually get into the, here's where it talks about the actual elements. I'm only going to do this, what I'm saying for this particular point applies to all the different solicitations. When you look at the required elements, what I always do, I use Word. I pull subject headings and I make them headings in Word. I take the required content and I hang it off to the side as a comment. I do not delete the comment until I've addressed every required element for that section. That's a way to make sure that you follow directions, because if you don't follow directions, you won't get funded. I mean, in some cases, you get a low score. In some cases, like if you go over the page count, some agencies will read up to the allowed page numbers. Some will say you went too long, they won't read it at all. So don't get thrown out on a technicality, and make sure you provide all the things that are being asked for.
And we can help you kind of organize your checklist and give you some of those templates as well. That's part of the things that we offer for you guys.
Our next example is DoD, and DoD isn't just the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. So within the Navy, that's also where all the Marine Corps topics live. Within the Air Force is where the Space Force topics live. But you've also got things like DARPA. You've got, as I mentioned earlier, the Defense Health Agency. We saw that the Missile Defense Agency funds things. There's they actually have some interest in microelectronics. Sounds weird, but they want to make sure that you're not getting counterfeit chips or chips that may have a backdoor. Some things that go across all the different components may be in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, or it could be in Special Operations Command. I saw a topic, this was about 5 years ago, Special Operations Command, high-test dog food. Dogs are working military personnel. Or I guess they're not personnel, but they're something like that.
Yeah.
Anyways, they have a concern about how well their military animals perform and how well they recover from injuries. So they were looking for a nutrient-rich dog food that they could deploy into a forward zone, so it can't need refrigeration and all that, so that they could keep their military animals working. So, sometimes there are surprises what comes out of these, but defense has a lot of different things. We're going to go through 2 examples. There's not, so 23.2 recently closed. 23.3 isn't open. So we're going to talk about a couple of the out-of-cycle topics or special topics. And the first one I'm going to look at is the Navy. So you want to find the funding announcement. So we end up on this funding opportunities page. And again, this shows you everything that's open. And you can see that there are all these 23.4 kind of topics. And if you switch to STTR, you'll see the 23.D kind of topics. So if we go ahead and grab a Navy one, and there are 2 open. I guess there's just 1 open now. Things are very dynamic. So between the time I wrote these slides and what's appearing to me today. So important thing to notice at the top of this solicitation, for the topic numbers, it gives you points of contact. So the same way you do a white paper for NSF, not to that same extent, probably much more abbreviated. You're going to probably send an email to these technical points of contact that says something like, your solicitation has a topic 4. Your requirements are, my technology is, and I think it advances the technology or it solves a problem in this area this way. Would this be responsive? The reason you want to do that is, 1, it kind of gives you an introduction to this person who's going to eventually assign reviewers to your proposal. It also gives you feedback as to, am I barking up the right tree? And in some cases, they'll come back and say, yes, it's responsive. And of the things you mentioned, this aspect is more of interest to us. So they may actually give you hints on what you should emphasize. So, so think about being in contact with these technical points of contact. As we look at the topics that are open.
So Ed is streaming through this, guys, but as he's doing that, again, reminder, this Department of Defense is an example of a contracting agency. They are typically, they have some quote unquote open topics where they're letting you kind of pitch something to them. It always has to have a military stakeholder need. They'd love to see it also have a civilian market need as well. That's that dual use. But when we're talking about a contracting agency, they are potentially one of your customers. They are putting out topics because they have a mission need to acquire that type of technology. So that does make a difference in terms of the topics. You'll see how these are much more specifically stated.
Yep. Thanks, Ann. So here you can see, again, this one happens to be open topics. If we look at this second one on here, this is the kind of way they're written. So, the title, NavAir, as an open topic for logistics in the contested environment. And it talks about different things. Realize that sometimes with DoD, there's going to be this thing you have to worry about called ITAR, which means there are restrictions on how you export things, and export includes how you disclose to foreign nationals. It's called a deemed export. So you have to be careful who's on your team and how you talk about things. Gives you a description of what they think the problem is. It kind of give you an idea of what they're looking for as far as phase 1 goals and deliverables. They talk a little bit about what phase 2 is going to require, and then they'll at least give you a hint of what they think the phase 3 applications are, who your customers are. They usually include references. I tell people, you should really read the reference. This is what they're basing this on. So it's part of your research. So this is the Navy example. One of the things I'll say is the Navy's kind of nice because we talked about contacting the technical point of contact, but when you go to prepare your proposal, they give you templates. And Navy templates don't work for the Army or the Air Force or Missile Defense Agency. So while they're really nice, don't take a Navy template and use it anywhere else. But so you can kind of see here's a template for the cover sheet, for the technical volume, for phase 1, cost proposal. So all this stuff is discussed in pretty good detail, but realize that you may be moving across a bunch of different websites and documents to figure out what goes into your proposal.
Yeah, and this is a plug too, when we're coaching, and we won't go deep here, but it's organizing yourself and your team for your proposal preparation process is a really important thing to do, because as you can see right now, just looking for topics, there's multiple sites that you want to be referencing. So we can also talk with you more about helping with that checklist.
Yep. So I'm going to jump into a different DoD. We're going to look at something from DARPA. So again, funding announcement. And there are multiple DARPA ones open. So I was looking at.
You're about right there. Yep. Right.
So Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So people kind of laughed at, Al Gore back in the day, but the internet came out of DARPA. I mean, the whole networking infrastructure for doing things started out as a DARPA project. So, so there are some interesting things that go on within DARPA. And, same kind of structure, again, tells you how many pages your volume can be. Here's where it's got that award amount. Tells you what your period of performance is. They expect you to do this in 9 months or less. And then when you get to the actual topic, this one they're looking for autonomous systems at scale. So the DoD, they use drones, they use unmanned ground vehicles, unmanned surface vehicles, unmanned underwater vehicles. They're looking at how can you help them, how can you help the operators have a simplified life in trying to deal with all of these autonomous or semi-autonomous systems. And the same thing, it talks about here's kind of the background. Here's what we're thinking for phase 1 effort and what goals could be. Phase 2, they're going to talk about it in less detail. And then they talk about phase 3, they have references as well. I always tell people, again, this is an aside, when you're writing your application, part of your description, your technology is your big picture. This is what it's all going to look like when it's done. And there's maybe a couple sentences about that. If you're doing a phase 1, you're going to talk about phase 2, but as a paragraph. And the meat of what you write is going to be, here's what phase 1 is going to accomplish. There's a couple agencies that let you go direct to phase 2.
That's Department of Defense and National Institutes of Health and the Department of Education.
Yep.
That's direct to phase 2. So those are the only 3 agencies that allow direct to phase 2, meaning you've already proven that it's feasible. You have a proof of concept. You just need the additional funds for the further R&D to get it to that hopefully commercial product availability.
Yeah. And so with the actual proposal, buried in here, and please read everything for the agency. Don't assuming, because stuff jumps out at you, but somewhere it has, here's the required elements.
Yep.
I must have missed it. Yeah, here it is. So you need a cost volume, company commercialization report. So all these things.
Technical.
And
yeah,
within DoD, some of the agencies don't have their specific guidelines. So then you have to actually go back to the DoD. So the DoD guidelines work unless they have specific instructions that override. And determining that is an exercise in reading comprehension. You have to read it and say, I have to do the Navy way, not the DoD way, or whatever. So, and I'm kind of making light of this, but it is complicated and you do have to follow the instructions.
yeah, and we can counsel too. Yeah, again, we can't replace you actually reading these yourselves, but we're here to also help you navigate this. Like, what are they talking about here? And what are they doing? Or your local FAST representative as well, where there is value in us having seen these multiple times, so we can help make sure that you're getting set up for success.
Yeah, I will say that, particularly if it's your first time doing SBIR, you're drinking from a fire hose. So what we expect is that after you take that first dive, you're going to come back with your next round of questions. It's kind of like peeling an onion. So, so don't have this feeling like, oh, I should be able to figure this out. It's like, no, you shouldn't. Come back and ask questions if you have questions. Okay, so now we're going to leave DoD and talk a little bit about NIH. So it's Health and Human Services, but the components within it are the National Institutes of Health, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the Food and Drug Administration. So those are the pieces that are part of NIH. NIH is very complex. You would think DoD would be the hard one. I think NIH has its own challenges, but what NIH, you remember when we did all the open solicitations? So they have those specific opportunities, but they also have this omnibus solicitation, which is, here's the one that's open all year with 3 submission deadlines.
Yep.
And there's 4 flavors of it. There's SBIR with clinical trial and without, and there's STTR with clinical trial and without. So you have to kind of make sure you're picking up the right document to figure out what pieces you're going to need. Because if you're doing a clinical trial, there's a whole nother set of things you have to do, particularly if you've got human subjects. Then there's even more you have to do. And there's a whole handbook that we will show you. So
What's great about NIH, so we've actually done, there's in Montana, about half of our, in recent years, SBIR awardees are coming through NIH. We have a really strong bioscience cluster here as well. It used to be DoD, still very strong in Montana as well, but NIH is really, we have a lot here. So we have a lot of expertise with this. And then there's also a lot of references within NIH. So if you guys are in biotech, biosciences, and you're looking for this, I can definitely make sure that we're pointing you to those other things about, do I have a clinical trial? Is there a clinical trial or not a clinical trial? They have some great infographics and decision trees on their site to help you to clarify. A lot of you may have human subjects, may or may not be a clinical trial, even though you may have human subjects. So we can talk about that. What we really want to do is focus on making sure that you know how to find which types of areas of techniques or of topics that NIH may fund, which institutes and centers, and which research areas they're looking for.
So on the NIH site, they haven't published their new topics yet. They probably are due, I would think, any day, because
This is it. The new topics haven't been listed.
yeah, I'm sorry. They have to do it right. So
Yep,
it's
they just-
2023.
Yeah.
So here's the 3 dates. They're roughly every 4 months, although January to April is a little shorter than that.
Yeah.
Here's all the documents. You should be clicking on these links and downloading these and reading them as well. Particularly this SF 424. This is kind of the instruction manual. It's not light reading. You can see that they break it out kind of by all the different agencies.
Mhm.
And just to make this move along rather than scrolling. We're going to look at, so say you had your technology happen to be assistive technology for people who are trying to age in place. So if you look at the National Institute of Aging, tells you what their mission is. But then it gets down into, here's the research topics. So here's aging in place. You know, research and development of social, behavioral, environmental interventions that promote independence and aging in place. So things like prosthetics, assistive devices and robotics, digital technology, so think monitors and sensors, software. Sometimes it could be they've got a monitor, but you're using like AI to, you know, kind of a machine learning thing to say, are they having an irregular heartbeat, or is there something wrong with their breathing? I've even seen ones where they do gait analysis. So you can tell if someone's a candidate for a fall, because falls are the most debilitating. That puts more people into a higher level of care when they're aging in place than anything else. So these are the kinds of things you can find. And here's the same thing. You know, I've talked about the technical points of contact. That same kind of thing. This is what you're asking for. This is what I can do. You know, is this responsive to the topic? Are there things I should be considering? Make sure you talk to these people, because they will give you feedback. They do answer these emails. They don't go off into a black hole. So,
Guys, I'm also going to plug. So I know MD Kearns. MD Kearns is the head of the SBIR program for National Institute of Aging at IH, and he has a great. It's what he asks for. So if anybody here is interested in something that may be appropriate for NIA, I have MD's requested questions, kind of his project pitch types of questions that he would love for you to answer when you request time to meet with him to talk about your application. So I can, let me know, hit me up if you'd like to know what MD is asking for. It's his questions, but they are a great set of questions for you just to think about when you're preparing to talk with a topic author, a program manager, about your technology and if it is responsive to that specific topic or that agency's requirements. So,
okay. Yeah. And so preparing your proposal, again, this is, so talked about that, you know, SF 424 for research. Well, guess what? There's multiple guides. So there's general instructions, but the one you're most interested in is this volume B, which is for SBIR, STTR, and has the research codes. And it's just a PDF that you're going to download. So,
yeah. But we'll talk about this as Ed's bringing this up. These are for each agency. So this is an example for NIH. You're typically what I call are the Bibles. One Bible that you're going to have when you're preparing your proposal after you've selected which topic you're going to apply to or research area is the instructions for that particular open solicitation, that solicitation that you'll be submitting your SBIR application to. They do not accept unsolicited applications. You have to do it underneath a solicitation for whichever agency that is. So they always have those instructions, but then every agency also has some type of application guide that will help you, give you some additional resources for how do I fill in this form or what is required for this form. So here's an example for NIH's.
And I will say at 176 pages, it seems daunting. It's example rich. You really want to pay attention to the examples in this guide because it'll make your life easier rather than, because what it says on the form doesn't provide sufficient explanation sometimes, and this guide does.
Yep.
So
yeah,
this guide is your friend.
Yep. Control F is your other friend. Control F, at least on PCs or Dell computer. I don't know what it is on Apple. That find on web page. So
Yep.
you look for things like budget or something else, and it'll highlight that. So you don't have to read it top to bottom. You can kind of use it as that reference guide. It's intended to be. The instructions you should read from cover to cover, from top to bottom. But this leverage it as a resource guide or whatever is similar for your agency.
Okay. So we got 4 minutes left and we got 2 slides left. So hopefully we can make it. So NASA is the next one I'm going to touch on. Montana recently has had some great success with NASA. I happen to be based in Colorado. Colorado does a lot of NASA work, but
Yes.
so what I always tell people that NASA solicitations tend to come out late in the year. There's another one called NASA Ignite that's probably going to come out in early August. We're not going to talk about Ignite for these purposes. It's a new thing they introduced, so I'm not sure that what they did last year is going to be what they do this year. The normal solicitation, this is what they've been doing for a while. Read last year's solicitation. The topics tend to live for a couple years. So it can give you an idea. And the reason that's important is if you want to ask questions of an actual person, you can only do it when a solicitation is not open. And not open means from the time it's published to the time they make awards. So right now being the operative word, there is not a NASA solicitation open. You can ask questions. And when you get into the solicitation, again, this is the SBIR one for last year. You can grab the individual chapters, but the actual topics are in chapter 9. And so here's everything going on in chapter 9. Fortunately, these things all expand. So again, because I've been doing some battery work lately, energy storage for extreme environments. This is what NASA is looking for. And, all these little things that are in here, like S is a topic that means something. So Anne mentioned that NASA taxonomy.
Yeah.
That's kind of like your pre-Bible. You want to have read that before you jump into the solicitation, or at least be familiar with the parts that apply to your technology. And, it talks about what it is they think is going to result from this. Gives you references. Again, read the references.
Yeah.
And, when you prepare your proposal, that's in section 3, and it talks about the actual areas. It does talk about page limits and margins, tells you what's in the completed package, but then it'll actually tell you, you have to have a table of contents. Here are things that you need, and they suggest page limits. So the page limit suggestion is kind of, if they want a lot of pages, it's probably important, and make sure you do a good job in talking about it. And it also includes in the solicitation what the evaluation criteria are. So have those in mind when you're writing it. So you're making sure you're stressing the things you're going to be graded on. So
yeah, that's another plug for tapping into the specific agency's website, and that also is certainly ask me. You have a link in the appendix of these slides. I'll send out to you guys afterwards. That will have those lists as well, but you can find the research areas for those. You can have links to these, for example, that NASA taxonomy. What are they interested in funding? How do we find which agency might be interested in my type of research? But you'll also find a lot of these links to all of this information. And you've already seen in this webinar, in this short webinar, examples of how different all of these instructions are, and why it's really important to make sure that you're taking a look at that when you're ready to. But again, kind of just getting started. I sent a link in the chat about a tutorial from SBA about speaking with topic authors. It's really good general guidance on what to do. We'll follow up with maybe, Ed, if that's okay with you, an example email that you may send to a topic author to request some time to speak with them about a specific area. And also send, if anybody's interested, the NIA one, you can let me know if you're interested in that one, and I'll send that off to you as well. But,
so there was a question in the chat.
Yes.
Do we provide assistance for the agencies we didn't cover? Yes, we provide assistance across all the different agencies. And I provide services through Ann. So if you contact Ann, she's got other consultants as well. So based on our workloads and areas of expertise, you may end up with someone else, but we do have the ability to, when you peel that next level of the onion for whatever agency it is, we can give you some guidance.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So there's one last topic that is not related to choosing a topic, but I always like to mention it. SBIR money helps you advance your technology. Advancing the technology is not all that goes into making a product. So if you need to learn about the market, if you need to talk to people, there's this separate pool of money that in most cases is above and beyond your award that you can use for commercialization assistance. And
this is for SBIR awardees. And so we can again talk to you about that as well. It's a brilliant resource.
so it does tell you what, kind of what's allowed and what's not allowed. The agencies have additional guidance on some of this stuff. But in some cases, particularly for phase one, there may be already an assigned vendor. And I've listed a couple that are kind of more well-known than others. But you can always pick your own, in most cases, you can pick your own vendor. So if you're already working with a consultant on business development, or if you already have an IP attorney and that's what you need to spend your money on, you can use your own vendor. You're going to have to get a budget from them. It's up to $600 or $6,500 additional for phase one. It's up to $50,000 for phase two. So it can go a long way towards those expensive things like patenting, or doing a study for how you build out a manufacturing line. So when you scale and actually start delivering widgets to the Department of Defense, you can do that. So it helps you do the non-technical parts of a product that is part of that commercialization. So it's very important. And using the phase one money for customer discovery gives you a stronger phase two commercialization plan, so a stronger proposal.
You guys, thank you for staying. For those of you staying longer, happy to stay on us. We can stay on a little bit longer, answer any specific questions. For those of you who have the ability to stay a little bit longer to talk with us. If you have specific questions, we'll keep it recording. So if you have to jump off, we can actually make sure that people may hear some of these Q&A afterwards, kind of the after hours session. But thank you again. Just want to remind you, take a look. Consider SBIR. If you have early stage technology development with broad impacts, that does still require some research and development that's novel and new. It is not already available out in the market space, but you're addressing an unmet need. SBIR could be a channel for you, and that's where we can help you just decide whether or not this is a good or bad option for you based on your tolerance, then help you coach so that you can put forward your most successful proposal. But we also help coach you when you're getting ready to speak with the topic author, maybe making sure that you're talking to them within the time periods that are allowed based on the agencies, based on their solicitation rules, things like that. So thank you so much. We're excited to have met with you. And we'll open up the question right now before we close. Goodbye to those of you who have to jump off now. But if anybody has some questions, go ahead and unmute right now, and we can address any questions. And if you don't have any, that is completely fine as well.
Or if you have them in a week, come back to us.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll make sure I have, I'll send out another follow-up, a thank you email. You'll see that coming from ann.peterson@montana.edu. So check just in case it may have been redirected. I'll send a copy of the slides. And then that way you'll have both my email address as well as Ed's. And I also will include in there a link. It's actually on the SBIR.gov website homepage, your local resource provider. So if you are not in Montana, feel free to reach out if you can't find your local FAST provider. But it will be a link to another FAST, a place where you can find your FAST SBIR support organization in your state. Thanks, everyone. appreciate you staying on longer. Thanks, Ed. Appreciate this.